Mason Johnson always thought his biggest challenges would come from school assignments, not from the woman who ruled his new neighborhood like a queen. But when Evelyn Marks, the feared HOA president, began stealing the Johnsons' Wi-Fi, Mason uncovered more than just a bandwidth thief. He exposed a digital intruder, hiding behind a perfectly trimmed hedge. The Johnson family had been looking forward to a fresh start. They had just moved into a picturesque suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, and kids riding scooters down tree-lined streets. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved politely, the trash always got picked up on time, and every driveway had a basketball hoop or a flower bed. For Ron and Leila Johnson, it seemed perfect, a quiet place to raise their 14-year-old son, Mason, away from the chaos of the city. They found the house at the end of a cul-de-sac with a white picket fence and a wide backyard, perfect for weekend barbecues and summer evenings under string lights. But from the very first week, there was one detail that didn't sit quite right. The internet connection, which was supposed to be fast and reliable according to the provider, seemed unusually sluggish. Web pages took longer to load than they should. Streaming services buffered constantly, and Mason, who attended an online school program for gifted students, frequently got disconnected during live classes. At first, they blamed the provider. Ron made several calls, waiting on hold for hours, while technicians came out to inspect the lines. Each time, the verdict was the same. Nothing was wrong. The connection should be fast and stable. Still, the problems persisted. Leila grew frustrated, trying to video chat with her family, and Mason began falling behind on assignments due to failed uploads and interrupted video calls. The turning point came late one evening when Ron was working on a hospital research report from home. The document kept freezing mid-save, and after half an hour of fighting with his laptop, he slammed it shut in frustration. Leila noticed that their phones were struggling to load basic web pages, even while standing just a few feet from the router. It didn't make sense. The system had been installed just days ago and was state-of-the-art. Why would it act like this? Mason, always curious and good with technology, offered to look into it. He had been teaching himself about computers and networks for over a year, often reading forums and watching tutorials online. With his parents' permission, he logged into their router's admin panel and checked the list of connected devices. That's when he noticed something strange. Among the expected devices, their phones, laptops, printer was one he didn't recognize. It was labeled iPad. He didn't say anything that night, but made a note of the device name. Over the next few days, he kept checking. New names popped up in laptop, interview. None of them matched anything the family owned. He tried blocking them, changing the Wi-Fi password, even setting up device filtering. Yet, somehow, they kept coming back. It was as if someone knew exactly how to sneak in, no matter what protections Mason added. That weekend, Ron brought up something he had nearly forgotten. A few days after they moved in, Evelyn Marks, HOA president, had dropped by unannounced with a tray of cookies and a thick welcome binder. She was polite, if a bit intrusive, and insisted on helping them get set up. Evelyn had asked if she could look at their router just to make sure it followed HOA guidelines for tech visibility. Ron hadn't thought anything of it at the time. She claimed it was part of making sure the home complied with the neighborhood's digital safety rules. Wanting to fit in, they let her in. Now, that simple act seemed suspicious. What kind of HOA checked Wi-Fi routers? Mason, now fully convinced that someone was stealing their connection, asked if Evelyn had ever touched the router. When Ron confirmed it, Mason's theory solidified. She must have copied the password or configured a way to access the network remotely. It wasn't just about the internet being slow anymore. Someone was inside their digital space, accessing what should have been private. Leila began to feel uneasy. If Evelyn had the Wi-Fi password, what else might she be looking at? Could she see their security cameras? Access smart home features? The Johnsons had moved into this neighborhood for peace and security, but something was off. Someone had taken advantage of their trust, and it was beginning to feel like a violation. They had no proof yet, just a growing pile of red flags and a clever teenager who wouldn't let it go. Mason knew there was more to uncover. He just had to dig deeper. But Mason couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious devices on their network. He felt an itch in his mind, a puzzle begging to be solved. Every time the internet slowed down or his schoolwork was interrupted, his frustration deepened. It wasn't just about convenience anymore, it felt personal. Someone was intruding into their private space, and it wasn't going to stop unless he did something about it. He began keeping a digital log of every unfamiliar device that appeared on the network. Every morning and evening, Mason would check the router's admin panel and write down the names, MAC addresses, and connection times of anything suspicious. Patterns started to emerge. The strange devices always connected during certain hours, late at night, early in the morning, and curiously, during scheduled HOA Zoom meetings. It wasn't random. Whoever was leeching their connection had a routine dot to confirm his suspicions. Mason set up a more advanced monitoring system using free tools he found online. He created alerts for when new devices joined the network and began measuring bandwidth usage. The results were shocking. The unknown devices weren't just slightly connected, they were consuming more data than the entire Johnson family combined. Someone was streaming shows, making video calls, downloading large files. The data consumption during certain hours aligned perfectly with the times Evelyn Marks was known to be working from home. Mason remembered seeing her mention it during one of the few HOA newsletters they received. She had bragged about how much she got done during her productive mornings and late-night strategy sessions. It was no coincidence that her productivity seemed to match their internet crashes. Mason's next step was to test his theory. He created a decoy network, naming it something generic but familiar, HomeWiFi 5G. He left it open with no password, but the network was and completely isolated from their real internet access. He wanted to see who would bite. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, an M device connected. He watched as it tried to pull data, only to be blocked at every turn. Whoever was doing this had no idea they were being watched. He kept everything quiet. Ron and Leela were already stressed and busy. Mason didn't want to burden them until he had something solid. In the meantime, he continued collecting evidence. He tracked login times, correlated them with timestamps from neighborhood cameras, and even took note of when Evelyn's car was in her driveway. The more he looked, the clearer the picture became. He realized that Evelyn wasn't just using their internet occasionally. She had woven it into her daily routine. Her work-from-home setup was running on their network. Her streaming devices were pulling content through their connection. Even her smart TV, which Mason could identify by the IP address, had logged into Netflix through their bandwidth multiple times. The strangest part was that every time they changed the password, the devices reappeared within a day or two. That meant she wasn't hacking in, she had the updated passwords. It led Mason to believe Evelyn had installed something physical, maybe a repeater or a device hidden somewhere near their property. But extensive checks turned up nothing. Then, he remembered one crucial detail when Evelyn had helped set up their router on move-in day. She'd spent nearly 15 minutes with it alone while Ron was distracted. That gave her ample time to save the credentials or install something that allowed ongoing access. Everything pointed to her. Mason compiled all his evidence in a detailed report. He included screenshots, charts, connection logs, and timelines. Still, he knew that just confronting her directly wouldn't work. Evelyn was powerful in the neighborhood. She was the HOA president, after all, and had a strong grip on every rule, committee, and decision. No one had ever questioned her authority, and any neighbor who dared to push back often found themselves buried in citations and complaints. So Mason decided to go the smarter route. He shared his findings only with his father, who was shocked but cautious. Together, they crafted a plan. They wouldn't accuse Evelyn outright. Instead, they would build a case, gather even more evidence, and expose the truth at the next HOA meeting. Mason also had an idea to make sure Evelyn never accessed their network again, no matter what she tried. It was bold, and it could get messy, but he was ready. The Johnsons had come to the neighborhood looking for peace and quiet. Instead, they'd discovered they were part of a hidden battle happening right inside their home, and Mason, the quiet tech-savvy teen, was turning out to be their unexpected protector. Mason's plan was taking shape. Now that he had the data and a solid understanding of Evelyn's digital habits, it was time to fight back quietly, carefully, and without tipping her off too soon. He knew any direct confrontation would be risky. Evelyn was the kind of person who smiled to your face while writing up a code violation behind your back. She controlled the HOA like a queen managing her court, and no one dared challenge her authority. But Mason wasn't interested in power plays or neighborhood politics. He just wanted to protect his family's privacy, and he had the tools to do it. The first step was sealing off their network permanently. Mason had already tried changing the Wi-Fi password multiple times, but each attempt only delayed the inevitable. Evelyn kept finding her way back in, likely because she had saved the configuration or had direct access through their original router setup. So Mason made a bold move. He replaced the router entirely. He ordered a high-security mesh system with built-in firewalls and device tracking capabilities. He installed it one weekend when Evelyn's car wasn't in the driveway, so there was no chance she'd notice. The new system allowed Mason to see every connected device in real time and instantly block unauthorized ones. He created 2 networks. One was a hidden, encrypted network exclusively for family use. The other mimicked the original network name but had no real internet access. It was a decoy, designed to trap whoever had been freeloading off them. Mason then installed logging software to document every attempt to connect to either network. He wanted undeniable proof not just for his family, but for the entire HOA board. The results were almost immediate. Within 12 hours, the decoy network recorded a connection attempt from a familiar device ID. My Pat had returned. A few hours later, laptop followed. The devices tried to access the internet, failed, disconnected, and then returned again as if someone was checking back, confused about the sudden loss of service. Mason smiled as he watched it unfold. She didn't know yet that the door had been locked behind her. He continued to let the decoy network run for a few more days, collecting timestamps and screenshots. He could now pinpoint exactly when Evelyn's devices tried to connect. It always matched her known schedule. She was still trying to ride on their internet, unaware she'd been cut off and digitally isolated. With the connection attempts piling up and more logs in hand, Mason decided it was time to act. He drafted a clean report and handed it over to Ron. The report detailed each unauthorized device, their MAC addresses, connection durations, and how they correlated with Evelyn's daily activity. It included side-by-side comparisons of bandwidth, usage before and after the network upgrade. There was no room for doubt. Ron, although initially skeptical, was now fully on board. He took the report and forwarded it to a few trusted members of the HOA Tech Committee residents who were known for being fair and level-headed. He didn't accuse Evelyn outright, but simply asked for a private meeting to discuss a serious cybersecurity issue that affected a homeowner. It was a smart move. By framing it as a general concern instead of a personal complaint, he avoided triggering Evelyn's defenses too early. That when the HOA Tech Committee agreed to meet, Ron brought Mason along. The group of 3 committee members gathered in one of their homes, where Ron and Mason presented the evidence. The adults sat quietly, flipping through printed copies of the logs, nodding slowly as the timeline unfolded. The committee was stunned by how thorough and clear the findings were. There was no guessing involved. Everything was supported by cold, hard data. Mason didn't speak much during the meeting. He didn't need to. His work spoke for itself. By the end, the committee agreed unanimously. Evelyn had been accessing the Johnsons' private network without permission, likely for months. It was a serious violation of HOA policy, which explicitly prohibited using another homeowner's resources without consent. Worse, it revealed a deeper problem. The HOA president herself was bending the rules. She enforced so strictly on others that the committee decided to hold a full board meeting in the coming days. Evelyn would be invited, but she wouldn't know the true purpose until the evidence was presented. It was a calculated move, designed to give her no time to prepare a defense. Mason had succeeded in building the case, and now it was time to watch the fallout unfold. The Johnsons had kept quiet long enough. The locks were changed, the trap was set, and the truth was ready to be revealed. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse, the same place where holiday events and neighborhood potlucks were usually held. But this time, the cheerful decorations and folding chairs couldn't mask the tension humming beneath the surface. Word had quietly spread among a few board members that something serious was going to be discussed. But no one knew the full details except Ron, Mason, and the tech committee members who had seen the report. Evelyn was invited like any other board member. Under the pretense of reviewing new community guidelines on digital security, Evelyn arrived, as she always did, confident, poised, and carrying a binder stuffed with printed agendas and highlighted notes. She took her usual seat at the head of the table, not suspecting for a moment that this meeting wasn't going to follow her usual script. Ron sat across from her, calm but focused, with Mason beside him, silently clutching the USB drive, loaded with the same evidence that had convinced the tech committee. The chairperson called the meeting to order, and for the first few minutes, things felt routine. There was a brief discussion about landscaping funds and upcoming pool maintenance, and then the chairperson cleared his throat and announced there was a matter of cybersecurity that needed immediate attention. He handed the floor to Ron. Ron stood up and explained that his household had experienced repeated, unexplained internet issues for several weeks. He said the problem had persisted despite multiple service visits, router replacements, and password changes. What finally solved the issue, he said, was an advanced monitoring setup that revealed unauthorized devices were connecting to their home network devices that did not belong to anyone in their household. At that moment, Evelyn's pen froze. Mid-note, she looked up, a faint crease forming between her brows. Ron continued, now referencing the printed report each board member had been given moments earlier. He explained how they had traced the devices using timestamps and network activity logs. Each connection, he said, coincided with specific hours that aligned with a certain resident's work-from-home schedule. The devices used more data than the rest of the household combined, sometimes operating late into the night. Several of the MAC addresses matched devices seen previously during HOA Zoom meetings attended by Evelyn from her home. Evelyn interrupted then, trying to dismiss the report as a technical misunderstanding. She claimed that Wi-Fi signals could easily be confused and that someone might have accidentally connected to the wrong network. But the room stayed silent as Ron played a short screen recording from Mason's monitoring system. It showed a device labeled MiPad attempting to connect to their decoy network repeatedly over a span of several days. The address was unmistakable. It was a direct digital fingerprint. When she realized she could no longer deny the evidence, Evelyn tried to downplay her actions. She suggested that during the welcome visit, she may have jotted down the Wi-Fi password for emergency HOA communication purposes. She said it was a simple misunderstanding, a mistake that didn't warrant such scrutiny. But the room had turned cold. These were neighbors she had micromanaged for years, people she'd fined for untrimmed hedges and cracked driveway edges. Now, they were looking at her differently. One of the tech committee members, a retired software engineer, spoke up. He said that even if Evelyn had accessed the network once by mistake, the repeated connections and volume of data usage over multiple weeks proved intent. Another board member, who'd once been penalized for leaving a garbage bin at the curb a few hours too long, pointedly asked how Evelyn would respond if another resident had done the same thing. Her silence was her answer. The board held a vote then and there. The decision was unanimous. Evelyn was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. She was also issued a formal violation and fined for unauthorized use of another resident's network. The chairperson informed her that the community would also be reviewing how much of her HOA work had relied on this unauthorized access, and whether any reimbursements were necessary. Evelyn sat motionless for a moment, then quietly gathered her binder and left the room without a word. No one stopped her. The clubhouse door clicked shut behind her, and it felt like a weight had lifted. People whispered in disbelief, glancing at Ron and Mason with quiet appreciation. The Johnsons had come to that meeting with facts and patience. They didn't yell, accuse, or seek revenge. They just wanted the truth to be seen. And now that it had, the balance of power in the neighborhood had shifted. For the first time in years, Evelyn Marks was no longer in control and everyone could finally breathe. Evelyn Marks vanished from the public eye almost overnight. The once ever-present president of the HOA, who used to patrol the streets with her clipboard and a tight smile, stopped showing up to meetings, events, or even her morning walks. Her house, once perfectly maintained with seasonal wreaths and manicured shrubs, began to show signs of neglect. The grass grew too long, the porch lights flickered, and the blinds stayed closed. It was a silent collapse, witnessed by neighbors who had once feared her authority. Now, they simply ignored her. For the Johnson family, life began to settle into the quiet they had originally hoped for when they moved in. Their internet connection returned to full strength. Mason's online classes ran without interruption, and Lila resumed her video calls with family without the frozen screens and dropped signals that had plagued her for weeks. The home finally felt like theirs, unwatched, unmonitored, and secure. Mason, however, didn't stop there. What began as a personal project to protect his household grew into something bigger. Encouraged by Ron and a few of the board members, who admired his skill, Mason launched a small online guide about digital safety for homeowners. He titled it Home Net Shield, a blog that explained in simple terms how to monitor a Wi-Fi network, set up secure routers, and spot unusual activity. Within weeks, other neighbors reached out to thank him. Some had noticed suspicious slowdowns in their own connections. Others just appreciated the clear non-technical advice. Soon, other communities and small forums began sharing Mason's work. His blog posts were reposted on neighborhood association pages and cybersecurity discussion threads. It was clear that what happened in their neighborhood wasn't unique. Plenty of residents across the country were vulnerable to the same kind of intrusion, and Mason had unknowingly tapped into a widespread concern. What had started as an act of protection had turned into a growing platform for education. Meanwhile, the HOA underwent noticeable changes. Without Evelyn at the helm, the board began reviewing older rules and guidelines, many of which had been created or enforced solely under her influence. A new president was elected, someone known for being fair, collaborative, and far less authoritarian. The culture within the neighborhood began to shift. Instead of punitive fines and unannounced inspections, the HOA began hosting community workshops, social events, and voluntary tech checkups. One of the first new rules passed was a clause about digital privacy. No HOA official, it now stated, was permitted to assist in the setup or handling of a resident's personal network or technology without written consent and the presence of the homeowner. It was a direct response to what had happened with Evelyn, and though her name wasn't mentioned, everyone knew the rule had been crafted with her actions in mind. The story of Evelyn's downfall eventually faded into the background. Neighbors stopped whispering, and new families moved in, unaware of the drama that had unfolded not long before. But for the Johnsons, the experience left a lasting impression. They had arrived as outsiders and ended up reshaping the dynamics of the entire neighborhood, not through confrontation, but by quietly standing their ground. Mason became a local legend of sorts. He didn't brag or seek attention, but everyone knew he was the one who'd cracked the mystery. At community events, older residents would pat him on the back, and parents would ask if he could help with their kids' school laptops. Mason remained modest about it all, more interested in coding and building than recognition. Still, it was clear his efforts had made a real difference. As for Evelyn, her house eventually went up for sale. A for sale by owner sign appeared on her lawn one morning, without any open house announcements or real estate listings. A few weeks later, moving trucks arrived quietly and left just as discreetly. She was gone, and with her departure came a sense of closure. The neighborhood was free to move forward, and the shadow she had cast for so long slowly dissolved. In the end, it wasn't about stolen internet or angry board meetings. It was about boundaries, personal, digital, and ethical. And thanks to a watchful teenager with a curious mind, a family found their peace. A community rediscovered trust, and a quiet street reclaimed its sense of home.